On January 25, 2022, the funeral of 26-year-old Elle Edwards was held at St. Nicholas Church in Wallasey, Merseyside, England. To see the beautiful young woman off on her final journey came several hundred people. The body of the young woman was delivered on a karate catafalque drawn by 4 white horses. Her unexpected and ridiculous death could not be accepted by the family's siblings. And the cold-blooded crime, which occurred in full view of everyone, did not leave the lips of concerned citizens for a long time. A man stopped in the parking lot near the pub Beacon, located in Wallasey. The local establishment had a special flavor and was full of visitors on Christmas Eve. For hours on end, the stranger kept his eyes on the entrance to the establishment. He felt that this was the most opportune moment for revenge. In the run-up to the festivities, the attention of many would be lessened. This meant that if he carried out his plan, he would be able to get away unnoticed. When at last the target appeared on the horizon, he fired. With a sense of satisfaction, the perpetrator started the car and fled the scene. On December 24, 2022, there was no sign of trouble. The city atmosphere was filled with magic. Everyone was preparing for the upcoming holiday. The streets were not crowded. In search of missing products, some residents were actively shopping in stores. Those who had not yet bought gifts strolled through shopping centers. However, most citizens were at home with their families. Christmas is a time of gatherings and cozy company. The Edwards family was also involved in the pre-holiday hustle and bustle. In addition, everyone was waiting for Lucy, one of the daughters of the family. To meet the upcoming holidays with her family, the girl flew in from Dubai. Her sister Ella was especially looking forward to Lucy's return. They were close in spirit and kept in touch despite the distance of thousands of miles. When the joyful moment of meeting occurred, the girls decided to cross paths with friends at the local pub, Beacon. There, they had a great time. They danced and sang in karaoke, joked and laughed a lot. It was calm and peaceful as never before. However, the general merriment was broken by loud clapping. "Are those fireworks?" someone asked in the crowd. No, the atmosphere of celebration was disturbed by someone's madness. At 11:50 p.m., 12 gunshots rang out at the entrance to the pub. The bullets hit 5 people, 4 guys, and 1 girl. Ella Edwards suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Someone familiar with her attempted to give her artificial respiration, but the efforts were futile. Elle's condition was deteriorating. The injuries were too severe. After calling emergency services, ambulances arrived at the scene of the shooting. Having examined the victims, the medics made a preliminary conclusion. The 22-year-old suffered leg injuries, the 24-year-old guy was wounded in the arm, and the 33-year-old man's wrist was injured. The condition of 26-year-old Ella and the 28-year-old guy was deemed critical. On the way to the hospital, the unfortunate woman, without regaining consciousness, passed away. Ms. Edwards' injuries proved incompatible with life. Only a few hours before the crime, Elle had been talking to her father. "I was busy with Christmas preparations when the police reported what had happened," Tim Edwards later recalled. "It came as a real shock to our family. Everyone who knew Elle found it hard to believe what had happened. After all, she was so young and beautiful for her early demise. Did she really have ill wishers in her entourage who were capable of such a thing?" Ella Edwards was a very beautiful and cheerful girl. She worked as a beautician in a local beauty parlor and also worked part-time as a dental assistant. Despite her young age, she was established in life and had a good income. She was very goal-oriented and had no plans to rest on her laurels. Ella was not deprived of male attention. Nature awarded her with outstanding external data. Her friends noted that in addition to external beauty, her inner beauty stood out. She was very kind and positive. The character of Ms. Edwards allowed to find a common language even with the most capricious customers. For what the employee was on good account with the management. Thanks to the love of beauty and makeup, the girl was waiting for a brilliant future. However, life ordered otherwise. At the first stages of the investigation, there were no clues. The intruder attacked as suddenly as he disappeared. At the scene of the crime, he left only shell casings and victims bleeding. Detectives knew one thing for sure: the attack was planned. Police needed time to determine if Ellie was the target of the attack or was a random victim. For the most part, law enforcement officials were leaning toward the idea that the girl was among the victims by accident. Detectives interviewed the victim's family to get a better understanding of the victim's personality and the specifics of her life. All spoke positively about the girl and frankly did not understand that someone could have attacked her intentionally. From their words, the deceased had no enemies. Ella was very beautiful. Perhaps there would even be those who envied her or wanted to be close to her. However, it is unlikely that the crime occurred on the basis of envy or jealousy. The Edwards family's words reinforced the police's speculation. The fact is that recently in the city has become not uncommon cases of strife between rival criminal groups. Sometimes, as a result of their use of firearms, innocent citizens suffered. Afterwards, the victims and witnesses of the incident were interviewed. It took a long time to check cell phone service. Officers also recovered CCTV footage from the pub. The investigation was to examine them. The authorities also contacted the media. They called on people with information to help bring those responsible to justice. Above all, this involved providing video footage from mobile devices that had been taken on the night of the incident. Any of them could show the car in which the attacker arrived. City officials held a meeting with local residents. First and foremost, they wanted to support and reassure concerned citizens. The next goal the meeting had was to convince eyewitnesses to share the data they had. It was possible that someone might have seen the moment of the attack or even known the perpetrator. A group of volunteer activists was organized who went door to door and talked to citizens. The result of the work was not long in coming. It was soon established that the attacker left the pub parking lot in a dark Mercedes A-Class. CCTV cameras also showed that having pulled up to the establishment, the offender waited for some time. Apparently, he was choosing the most convenient moment for the attack. When Elle and other young people were outside, he fired shots. After that, he quickly got into a car and drove away. It was possible to establish the moment of the crime and the fact that the attacker was alone. However, it was not possible to determine where the intruder went. So detectives went door to door, interviewing the residents. Hoping to identify the attacker, they described the vehicle and the circumstances of the incident. All city streets were patrolled around the clock. On December 25th, the funeral of the murdered girl was held. Despite it being Christmas Day, the site of the victim's last funeral was closed as a sign of grief and remembrance for the victims. The owner of the Beacon pub left a message on his social media page with words of support for the family of Elle Edwards. On the same day, her father laid flowers at the door of the establishment. "To my beautiful Elle, the light of my life. You will always be with us," he whispered. Already on December 26th, two suspects were detained. They were a 19-year-old Rock Ferry resident and a 30-year-old man from Tranmere. The woman was taken into custody on suspicion of conspiracy to commit a felony. 2 days later, another arrest was made against another Tranmere resident. The 31-year-old man was also suspected of conspiracy to commit a felony. At the time of his arrest, the two earlier arrestees remained at the station. The names of the detainees were not released due to lack of direct evidence. All three were soon released. The police failed to prove their involvement in the crime. The locals were angry at the rampant crime and the impotence of the police. Therefore, the detectives were forced to issue a statement again. They said that the investigation would continue until the culprit was identified and punished. It was still assumed that the shooting at the Beacon pub had been caused by a feud between local gangster clans. And the unfortunate Elle Edwards was seen as a random victim. On December 30th, law enforcement reported that the 3 male victims had been released from the hospital, and the condition of the critically wounded 28-year-old had finally normalized. On January 3, 2023, police reported that about 150 pieces of data were obtained during the investigation. Among them was some very important information. It was found that the bullets fired by an unknown person could have been intended for Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld. The boys were part of a local gang. The group could not share a territory where illegal substances are traded with a rival clan. According to information obtained from closed sources, the two were seen scuffling on December 23rd. Apparently, the two did not take the fight that took place as a looming threat to their gang. Therefore, the next day the bandits went on vacation to Mayak. By their appearance there, they put the other visitors in the gunman's crosshairs. At the same time, thanks to video surveillance systems, managed to track the car on which the criminal left the scene of the crime. However, the intruder was ahead of the detectives. New Year's Eve turned out to be as turbulent as Christmas. The police station received a report of a fire near the Beacon pub. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a car matching the description of the wanted vehicle. Despite the fact that the vehicle burned out completely, the examination confirmed its identity. Apparently, the perpetrator knew that the police were on the trail, so he set the fire in order to destroy the evidence. It was also possible to establish that the car was stolen. On January 11th, the total number of people suspected in the murder of Elle Edwards rose to 5. Detectives said they had made an arrest of a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman from Wirral. On January 13th, police announced the capture of the perpetrator of the shooting. He turned out to be Connor Chapman. Despite his young age, the boy was well known to police and the criminal world. He had a long record of robbery, hooliganism, threatening behavior, and aggravated carjacking. The latter offense was a real star attraction as he made headlines in many newspapers. He has been charged with several offenses in the current case. At the same time, the 23-year-old woman who was detained was released on bail. The investigation continued. It turned out that on the afternoon of December 24th, there was a scuffle between two rival groups. The cause was an area near a wooden church located in Beechwood. The altercation was very violent, but no compromise was reached. Somehow, Chapman became aware that several of his enemies were celebrating Christmas Eve at a local establishment. Instead of spending his first Christmas outside of prison in 4 years with his family, Connor opted for revenge. So Ella Edwards really was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Chapman wasn't acting alone. Investigators managed to find out the name of another defendant in the case. It was 20-year-old Thomas Waring. The guy was taken into custody. He was charged with possession of firearms and assisting a criminal. During a search of Thomas's home was found significant evidence for the investigation. It was a videotape taken before the incident. It shows Connor picking up a gun and saying he was going to get even with someone. After the shooting, the perpetrators hid the stolen car. Later, in order to confuse the investigation, they ordered a cab under an assumed name. At around 5 a.m., the criminals returned to the place where they had hidden the Mercedes. In order not to waste time eliminating traces, they decided to get rid of the direct evidence in the case. As for Connor Chapman's identity, it was criminalized from a young age. He was born in Birkenhead, Liverpool. He was raised by his grandparents. The boy was abandoned by his parents at an early age. Since the teenager studied poorly, he dropped out of school shortly before his exams. In general, Connor has always been a problem child. Therefore, special hopes for the guy did not lay on neither teachers nor relatives. Chapman committed his first crime, shoplifting, at the age of 14. In 2016, he committed a carjacking. In 2017, another theft was joined by possession of a controlled substance. For the past 2 years, Chapman has been under police supervision and had restraining orders. However, he was more than willing to violate them. He was eventually deemed a danger to the community, so they restricted his access to several parts of the city. In 2018, he violated the ban again. Connor was in a restricted area. He also had a knife and illegal substances on him. That same year, the public heard about him for the first time. His sorry excuse for stealing a car became an anecdote among the local population. 18-year-old Connor had no intention of getting on the straight and narrow. Last time he stole an Audi. When a patrolman on the streets of the city noticed the stolen car, he ordered the driver to stop. Chapman, however, had no intention of obeying the officer's instructions. With all his might, he pressed the gas. He only provoked a chase. Along the way, the guy committed other offenses on the road. He ended up crashing into a curb. The car was thrown sideways and spun around. As a result, the carjacker was forced to leave the cabin. After not traveling a great distance, the runner was caught. The patrol caught up with Connor in the bushes. In his defense, he said he was expecting a buddy. His phrase later became a catchphrase. At trial, the defense fiercely argued for Chapman's freedom. The defense argued that the guy was under the influence of bad company, and also claimed that he was diagnosed with ADHD and a number of other mental disorders. This report was issued by a private specialist during the trial. The lawyer insisted that Connor was innocent and needed to be released. Thus, he was sentenced to 8 months in juvenile prison. Upon release, he was also brought a driving ban. This was a fairly minor punishment for a repeat offender who had 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes. The young criminal clearly had no intention of stopping and spit on all societal rules. In January 2020, Connor went on trial again. This time, he was sentenced to 10 months in prison for being caught in a public place with pockets full of illegal substances. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again for 5 episodes of the offenses. At the same time, Chapman boasted of questionable accomplishments. He proudly claimed that he spent more time in prison than he did on the outside. Eventually, by the time he was 20 years old, he had received 19 convictions for 43 felonies. 6 months before the horrific incident at the Beacon pub, Connor was tried again. The lawyer insisted that the guy had realized everything and was finally ready to reform. Chapman himself confirmed the words of the stitch-up. As mitigating circumstances, the lawyer cited the impending birth of Connor's girlfriend. Pressing on pity, he said that the first child was born when the guy was behind bars. At the time of the last trial, the police were aware that Connor was in a gang and selling illegal substances. However, oddly enough, he was only tried for burglarizing a house and stealing a couple of electric motorcycles. Perhaps there was corruption involved in the case. At least the high-priced lawyer worked off the fees he was paid. Amazingly, everyone recognized that the guy was dangerous. At one time, law enforcement officials even made a statement on television telling the public to be wary of Connor. After committing a crime, he would serve his sentence and then be released again. It's a vicious criminal cycle. However, there was no good reason for Chapman's isolation. Most likely, it was due to the fact that no one was seriously hurt by his actions. The public was extremely indignant about the gaps in the law. It appeared that nothing could be done with hardened criminals until they maimed someone or killed them. On June 13, 2023, the trial of Connor Chapman began at Liverpool Crown Court. 12 members of the Edwards family took part. Prosecutor Nigel Power announced what the defendant was charged with. Chapman pleaded not guilty to all charges. The fact that the guy was caught on CCTV footage, he tried to deny. Connor this time said that, on the night of the attack, he was at home wrapping presents. He was also evasive about the stolen car. At first, he denied stealing the Mercedes. Connor claimed that the car belonged to his gang. Later, he said that he had burned it because he had learned that one of his associates had committed a crime with the car. As sufficient evidence had been collected, his lie was obvious. The trial lasted 3.5 weeks. During this time, all the circumstances of the crime were established. The real reason for the shooting on December 24th in a local pub was rage and revenge, which Chapman could not control. In fact, he didn't care who got in the way at the time of the massacre of Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld, members of a rival gang. Prior to that, he had acquired a Scorpion submachine gun. The weapon could fire about 15 shots in less than 1 second. Connor jumped into the stolen car and drove to the Beacon. Before firing the shot, he kept surveillance for 3 hours. In the meantime, the security camera captured Elle happily socializing with friends. She even left briefly to go into another pub before taking her sister Lucy home and returning again. At 11:47 p.m., the girl showed up outside again to have a smoke. To her misfortune, she found herself next to Chapman's targets. At this time, Connor was just in the parking lot. His long brown hair was visible on camera, as well as his face covered by a hood or balaclava. A short time later, as he heeled toward his car for further escape, he fired 12 shots. The resulting wound rendered Ella unconscious and fell on top of Salkeld. Thus, Elle Edwards received bullets that were not meant for her. After the attack, Connor was going to flee to Spain, but literally at the airport was detained by law enforcement officers. To cover their tracks, Chapman and Waring set fire to the car and got rid of the weapon, which, by the way, was never found. However, traces of Connor's DNA were found on one of the shell casings, which indicates that the defendant loaded the gun before firing it. During the search of his home, red gloves were found which were clearly visible on the pub's CCTV footage. They were also found to have his DNA on them. All of these facts linked Chapman to the massacre that took place. By the way, while the perpetrator was awaiting sentencing, both of his attack targets were behind bars. Before the jury of 5 men and 7 women went to discuss the verdict, Tim Edwards was given the opportunity to speak. He said he had been forced to view CCTV footage before the trial. "It's horrible to see your daughter die and not be able to prevent it. I will never forget it. Ellie was in the street with her back turned to her perpetrator," the father reported. He added that if the shots had come 6 inches up or to the side, his Elle would still be alive. Ella's father hoped the final verdict would be fair, and the perpetrator would never again be able to spend Christmas with his family on the loose. It took the judges 3 hours to come to a unanimous decision. On July 7th, 2023, Connor Chapman was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 48 years. The Edwards family was happy that the cold-blooded criminal would be behind bars for the rest of his life. The convict cynically committed the crime and did not even think to repent of it. It was proved at the trial that the pub shooting was the culmination of a feud between the Woodchurch and Beechwood estate gangs on both sides of the M53. Thomas Waring was also found guilty of all charges against him. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison by the court the same month. Such a short sentence was probably due to the fact that the lad, unlike Chapman, had little criminal experience. The public was outraged. Innocent citizens were once again caught up in criminal disputes. They were even angrier that potentially dangerous gang members often served minimal sentences. Prohibitions, which are used by the courts as additional penalties, have little effect. This became particularly evident in the case of Connor Chapman. The lad was subject to a ban on being on the premises where the pub was located, as well as a ban on driving. To ensure the safety of the public, they proved ineffective. The death of Elle Edwards was proof of that. The incident highlighted the need for a review of the existing legal framework. In addition, the brazen attack once again highlighted the problem of firearms availability. After several similar deaths in the county of Merseyside, the government has allocated $350,000 to implement a pilot program. It is linked to reducing gun crime across the region. Tim Edwards also announced the organization of a fund to support victims of gun violence. One of the main goals of the national authorities should be to reduce the number of guns in the hands of civilians and criminal gangs. Father L. expressed his views. He also added that carrying weapons, even for children, is becoming the norm. The younger generation is particularly vulnerable to what they see and hear. Mr. Edwards recalled that during his childhood years, he never heard of any of the kids picking up a gun, much less knowing where to get one. In his words, everyone has become very vulnerable in today's society. People are not safe anywhere. An attack can happen in a private home, on the street, or in a crowded place. A prime example of this was the party at the Beacon Pub on Christmas Eve 2022. A celebration that should have been full of joy and warmth for Elle Edwards turned into an irreparable tragedy.